This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. Today we have breaking news to cover as the Cleveland Cavaliers have finally filled their head coaching vacancy after over a month, I think. And they ended up right where they started, with Kenny Atkinson swooping in to get the job at the last second. Atkinson had previously coached the Brooklyn Nets with Jarrett Allen and Caris LeVert, as well as serving as an assistant coach for the Golden State Warriors during their championship run in 2022. So there's lots of interesting stuff and even some drama behind the decision to get to. And joining me to discuss all of this is my co-host, Jackson Flickinger. Jackson, let's start here. Give me your quick, instant reaction to the news. I know you were a Borrego fan. How are you feeling right now?
I still wish it was Borrego. I just really liked what he did in Charlotte, but I don't think you can argue too much with the Atkinson decision. They both have similar backgrounds in the sense of they're both offensive guys and they both have some ties to, like, Atkinson coached under Coach Bud, whereas Borrego comes from the Spurs, where Coach Bud also comes from. So there's a lot of similarities between both of their profiles. They're both guys who are known for their player development. So it's really, from the outside, it's sometimes tough to really evaluate coaching because we don't have everything. We're not inside the room. But you could talk me into either one of these guys. They are both theoretically what the Cavs need. The Cavs need an offensive coach that can get the most out of the talent they have on this roster. And there's reason to believe that Atkinson can do that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said all of that because I have seen a lot of people kind of sharing the sentiment that because, and we'll talk more in depth about this decision appears to be heavily influenced by Dan Gilbert. So there have been some groans and complaints. Now, I will say, I'm glad that you mentioned that. They are too similar. Borrego and Atkinson are similar candidates. I don't think we should be disappointed that Atkinson was the choice here. And look, I've been so caught up in NBA draft stuff that I haven't even really taken the time to worry about the difference between those two. And I've always said that you hit on this. There's so much stuff outside of our knowledge when it comes to coaching an NBA team that I couldn't tell you who would be the right guy for any given job. With that said, you had convinced me to be Team Borrego, so I'm slightly disappointed. Thank you for that, Jackson.
Same.
But you know what? I'm still excited for the team to go in a new direction under a new coach. I think Atkinson is worthy of the job. I'm interested to see how he prioritizes developing the young guys, how the offense will change under his guidance, if we'll see an emphasis on pace, off-ball movement, ball movement in general, if the role players will look like they have more freedom, if he is willing to bench guys when they need to be benched, if it'll be tough on the stars.
Yeah, maybe Isaac Okoro will be allowed to dribble more than twice in a row. That may be cool. So. One of the things that I think is interesting, and this kind of applies to Borrego as well, is that both of them were hired to their previous head coaching jobs for a long-term rebuild of sorts, and both Atkinson and Borrego are both hired to not do that job. Like, JJ Bickerstaff did that job for them. He's the one who laid the foundation. He's the one that righted the ship for a franchise that was really dysfunctional when he took over. So Atkinson, this is a new challenge for him. And the last time he was kind of in this position, which, the net situation with Kyrie and Kevin Durant is a very different situation. But it was still, like, the Cavs' current situation is closer to that than it is, taking over a team that has Spencer Dinwiddie and, basically a bunch of guys that don't really fit together. So it'll be interesting to see how he's able to, just to see what his voice is like in the locker room, just to kind of see how the Cavs respond, especially in the first 20 or so games of next season.
Oh, yeah, especially when you look at some of the reporting that we saw after JB was fired, which seemed to indicate that he had lost the locker room, at least to a degree. You bring in a new guy who Hopefully we'll have buy-in right away. I'm just very excited to see what that looks like, how many changes we'll see from that. And I'm also interested to see the fallout of this decision and the potential implications for how all of this happened. Quickly, before we get into that, let me just say, if you enjoy the Junkyard Pod, please consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like. Those two things go a long way toward helping the channel, and it is very much appreciated. The NBA draft is right around the corner this week. I will have a full ranking of 20 different prospects coming tomorrow. We also have 2 other podcast episodes breaking down a handful of prospects, so please go check them out. And getting us back to today's episode, one of the most interesting things about this hiring that I'm going to pass off to Jackson here in a second is the Dan Gilbert aspect of everything. Now, from the Woj report, it sounds like the Cavs and Kobe Altman were pretty set on Jackson's guy, James Borrego, being the guy for the job, right up until the powers that be, Dan Gilbert, interjected and got his way with Atkinson being named head coach. Now, if you look back at Dan's recent history with coaches, we have John Beilein and David Blatt, which suggests the Cavs will fire Atkinson mid-season, and then they'll settle on finding the right guy for the job. Joking. And again, it's important to distinguish Atkinson has 13 years of NBA experience, very different from those other candidates. But it is worth mentioning he doesn't have any experience podcasting, which makes me question, are the Cavs truly at the forefront of NBA advancements? Is Dan behind the times here? But in all seriousness, Jackson, are you concerned at all with Gilbert's influence here? I know a lot of people are worried about it.
I'm not as concerned as the masses are on this. I think one of the things about when you have an owner who does like to meddle, and I think we can say Dan likes to meddle, is that coaching is the easiest thing for somebody who is a businessman like Dan Gilbert was / is to meddle in, because they have experience with evaluating interviews and, you know, talking to people, and kind of really what a head coach is a head coach is like a middle manager. You know, they report up to the GM and the owner, but they're also in charge of what's happening on the floor. So they're always in between this position of like balancing power and stuff. And that's something that I think, again, someone like Dan can relate to that, because he's hired people at his own businesses that have similar roles in a way that, you know, maybe Dan isn't. We know that Dan does influence draft decisions, or at least he has in the past. But it's a lot easier for an owner to justify doing that, I think, in their mind, in a way that, like, oh, I didn't actually go to all of Alabama's games this year, so maybe I shouldn't be saying whether or not we should draft a point guard from there. So I think it's understandable, and I think it's also okay, because I think the outcome was, like, it was not an out of the box thinking approach. This wasn't Beilein. This wasn't him trying to get Chauncey Billups to be like the president of basketball operations. This wasn't, you know, this just wasn't like a Dan move. This wasn't like Tom Izzo. He didn't throw a bunch of money at Calipari. You know, like, there's a lot of Dan things that could have happened here, and this wasn't a Dan thing that happened. So, like, I think it's fine from that standpoint. What I do think is concerning is that we are getting some of these leaks that, yeah, you know, like, I really like James Borrego. Like, you know, please put it in the papers that, you know, James Borrego was my guy. I think that's concerning, because it shows that, you know, this tenure is not off on the right foot. Like, everyone's not on the same page. And I do understand that you can like Borrego more than Atkinson. We liked Borrego more than Atkinson. So it's not like it's unfair to think that. But I would like it more if the Cavs were more unified in this decision. So I think from that standpoint, that's concerning, not necessarily the fact that Dan was involved, or that, I mean, I will not say that Dan being involved is always ideal, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah, like, that outcome's acceptable. I think the problem is some of the process behind it. I think that's what's a little concerning.
Yeah, no, I think you made fantastic points right there. Regardless of what the end results are here, I think everyone reasonably should be able to agree that Atkinson was a reasonable choice. He didn't really go outside the box, like you said. I'm glad that you also mentioned the fact that in moments where an owner can kind of meddle, when it comes to hiring a coach, is a lot more understandable than Dan being like, hey, you know what? I love Zach Edey. We're going to draft him at number 20, even though he didn't do the scouting or anything like that. So it's a very different situation. Again, I think the process is where people have some concerns. I think this is a potential rift between Kobe and Dan, at least the most notable one that we have seen publicly. It depends on the truth of how everything actually went down. The real Cavs fan on Twitter pointed this out, and I think it's worth mentioning that we don't know if there was a healthy debate or discussion on this matter, or if Dan simply just brought his fist down and made a demand. If you want my speculation, I would say it's probably closer to the latter. Wendy, fan of the show, certainly indicated that this was more of a unilateral decision, and something that I found very interesting. Wendy also mentioned that Borrego really, really wanted this Cavs job. He says that Borrego would have taken it over the Lakers job, and apparently he even attempted to appeal his case to Gilbert in recent days once Atkinson reemerged as the front runner. So as a Borrego guy, that's kind of disappointing to hear, just knowing how passionate he was and how dedicated he was to this potential job. I'm sure Atkinson is also excited, but it's just something worth mentioning. And lastly, before I let you jump back in, I think this comes back to what I've been saying about Kobe, is that I think this summer and this upcoming season is going to be make or break for him. I think we are seeing pretty clearly that Dan is starting to question him at least a little bit. And if he doesn't put together a roster that truly, truly competes, the writing might be on the wall now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so tough because, like, it feels like Kobe isn't in a position to run it back with his team. It feels like running it back with this current core may be the most risky thing. Like, if they were a first or second round exit next year with this current core, it feels like Kobe could be gone, especially if they don't nail the mid-level exception, which they did not nail the mid-level exception last year. So and they're not going to have a mid-level exception next year. Cap people can correct me, but they're not going to have, at least not the full mid-level exception, because it'll likely be in the tax. So this is a really important year on a lot of fronts for Kobe. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment of the situation. One thing I do want to note is that from previous Dan hires, you think of, Beeline, you think of, why am I blanking on the fighter pilot's name right now? Blatt. You had to hire a babysitter, for them. You had to hire Ty Lue. You had to hire JB Bickerstaff. Like, that was like the GM's guy. That was Griffin. Like Griffin wanted Lue, but let's just make a compromise. Like, you're not gonna have to do that with Atkinson. I mean, it may end up being a situation where Borrego ends up being like the associate head coach or something like that. I don't know that. He seems to be in the running for the Pistons job, but they're not bringing somebody on to like babysit Atkinson. And that's kind of where I think it's important to like say that, hey, like, this guy's very qualified for this job. And if this was, if we didn't have any of this back and forth and they just hired Atkinson and there wasn't this whole Borrego thing that we've been hearing reports about, this is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This is the type of guy that they need.
The thing that I'm most excited about for Atkinson is just the player development. This is a guy who kind of started or built his career on being a player development guy. Woj mentioned in his report that the Cavs are especially eager to see how he provides a path for Evan Mobley to develop as a player, which is something that we have been wanting to see. Again, we mentioned this at the top. The role players having more freedom. Please let these guys dribble. Don't just stick them in the corner. Atkinson comes from a list of teams that play a run and gun, shoot three-pointers with value, connectivity, playmaking from all positions, a modern style that I'd hope and expect the Cavs to play more like a unit with all-around effort on offense as compared to the guard-heavy, kind of heliocentric style that we have come to know. That means letting even Evan Mobley dribble the ball a little bit. Let him face up rather than post up and try to maximize this roster. Now, one thing I want to say that has been mentioned in all the reports, I don't care about Atkinson's connection to Karis LeVert. I don't care. Like, that doesn't move me. The only connection Atkinson should have with Karis LeVert is a Zoom connection, because I'm hoping that they won't be talking too much this season. You know what? I love Karis, but I'm ready to move.
Doesn't sound like you do love Karis.
Not to send a stray his way, but I don't care about that aspect of it. I think they should be looking to move on.
Like, I love Jetty. I would be fine if Jetty came back. Jetty could play on any team for me. But, anyways. Yeah, I think that's one thing that I found really interesting is that, like, the Woj article said, like, oh, we're going to develop center Evan Mobley. And I feel like that's just a massive shot at the coaching staff previously.
I didn't
where,
catch that, yeah.
Yeah, where you have we have a team that lost to the Boston Celtics, the NBA champions, and if Mitchell stays healthy, you can convince me that they win one or two more of those games in that series just with how dominant Mitchell was and how Boston really didn't have an answer for him. And usually a team in that situation, you don't hear like he's being hired to develop Evan Mobley. You expect like, whoever gets hired by the Pistons, like, oh, they're going to develop a culture. They're going to develop Cade Cunningham, Ivy, whatever. Like they're not like you don't hear that for a team in the Cavs position. So I think that's interesting and telling. And that's, I don't want to, it's tough to get into Dan Gilbert's head. But if I was to, it feels like that's something that I think he feels that this team can do a better job. And one of the things that I think is still really interesting is that, like, Dan Gilbert didn't make many public appearances this year in terms of, like, going to Cavs games, but he went to All-Star Weekend and went to the Rising Stars game and talked to Emoni Bates afterwards for 10 minutes, which is just, out of character from what we've seen from Dan in, the past couple of years. So I feel like he thinks, like, if I were to speculate, this is all speculation, it seems like he thinks there's more that you can get out of these younger guys than what they're currently getting out of them. So I think if I was to speculate as to why Atkinson may have been the guy in his mind, that could be it.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I kind of hinted at the start of the episode is that I hope Atkinson he has the guts to bench guys when they need to be benched and play some of the younger guys. Think of how much we wanted to see of Sam Merrill throughout the year. Even moments where we wanted Craig Porter, moments where we thought maybe Emoni could get a chance. Now, I don't think any of those guys are capable of truly changing anything for the Cavs. I don't think
hold on.
Sam Merrill, of course, excluded from that conversation. But I just mean in terms of really just experimenting a little bit more. That's what the whole player development stuff comes down to, at least for me. My gripe with JB and the way they have handled this is that they're not allowing these guys to experiment and find out what we have. Hey, can Okoro handle the ball? Let's find out. Instead of sticking him in the corner and limiting him to 3 dribbles a game, let's see what he can do if he's in a couple dribble handoff actions. Let's see if Mobley can face up. Let's just try things. And so I hope Atkinson has the freedom and the guts to do that. Obviously, clearly has Dan Gilbert's favor, so he should feel comfortable trying some things. The next thing that I want to talk about,
last thing, real quick, is that I think it's like he spent his last couple years in Golden State, and the biggest complaint everyone has that you would know this as you're an avid Warriors fan, like why don't we just let Steph just run the show? But they have a very set offense where everybody touches the ball. No matter how much you suck, you still get to touch the ball and do things. And that's what we've been wanting to see from the Cavs forever. We want Isaac Okoro to be a basketball player. We want, Dean Wade to be a basketball player. We want these guys to play basketball, and we don't want, the guys that have the best feel for the game and have the best fundamentals, it seems, are guys who haven't, come up through the Cavs system. We're looking at Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen, Max Strus, even Sam Merrill. They aren't products of the Cavs development system. They're more so products of other teams' development.
Yeah. And to that point, listen, I'm the biggest Okoro fan in the world. I still like Dean Wade. But the reality is, if you put the ball in their hands a little more and you experiment and you find out, hey, okay, he can't do these things. Well, now Now we know that we need to move on and find guys who can do that stuff. But right now is it year 4 or 5 of Okoro's career? And
and you're going to have to pay Okoro because if, when he gets to restricted free agency, people see, 6'6", they see him one of the best wing defenders. Oh, he has enough skills. We can do something from him. What are we going to do? Pay, KCP, so it's there's really only it's a coveted position. So you're going to have to pay him, and it feels like you don't even know who he is, and he's been in your gym for 4 years. And that's what I think the problem is. So it's, even though the Cavs have succeeded, if we went back 4 years ago, I think everyone would sign up for, two playoff series victory. Like, we all would have signed up for that, but it's these other things that are really, really the issues.
Yeah, we just need some clarity on a lot of these things that I feel like we don't have. We're going to hurry up and get to the end here and wrap up, because I know Jackson has to go. Thank you for taking the time out to cover this breaking news with us.
Yeah,
the last thing,
the least I could do.
Of course, man. The last thing that I think is interesting is that now that this is finally, the decision has been made, we know who the coach is, are the floodgates for the offseason officially about to open up? I know that it's been reported that they plan on offering Mitchell a 4-year extension. All signs indicate towards him signing that. I will wait to take my victory lap, which I've been waiting a long time to do so. We'll wait. We'll get to that. But even, are we going to start hearing some rumors heating up about the Darius, Garland, and Jarrett Allen stuff? I know Kobe seems like he wants to keep the core together, but Dan has certainly shown that he is willing to take control here. So draft day is coming up. Free agency is coming up. I'm very excited to see if, now that we know who the coach is and we know that Dan is meddling a little bit, how much all of this is going to heat up if the floodgates have officially opened.
Well, the floodgates are going to open because, the tampering period ends on Sunday. So, there's going to be some action. It's like same with the draft. These would naturally be points where you're going to be getting speculation, and trades could go down. I don't think we're going to really hear anything before a trade goes down. We didn't hear anything before. The Cavs weren't eyeing Jarrett Allen for months before they traded for him. Yeah. They weren't, you got some buzz with the Mitchell stuff, but it felt like it might not have been buzz from the Cavs. It was more buzz from the Jazz. Right. Try to get them to throw in a better offer. So there, I don't think we'll hear a whole lot, but the Donovan Mitchell extension is something that could happen sooner now, you would think. You would think that, the order of operations would be, all right, let's get a coach. Okay, let's get Donovan Mitchell re-signed. Okay, let's get the draft, figure out what we're going to do, get the mid-level exception, figure out if we're trading Allen/Garland. So, yeah, but, it's also kind of like that time of the year, too.
Yeah, I mean, the dominoes were going to fall regardless of what the Cavs plan on doing. That's all for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. I want to thank everyone for watching or listening. What do you think of Kenny Atkinson? Is this the right guy for the job? Are you worried about Dan Gilbert's influence here? Let us know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, I don't have any questions for you today. Sorry. Leave a comment. You never leave a comment.